All right, thank you, everyone. I'm Daniel Shapiro. I'm a researcher at Blockworks, and our panelists don't need any introduction, but I'll let you guys go through one by one and introduce yourself and what you're doing right now.
I'm Cronje, founder of Yearn.
I'm Sam Kazemian, founder of Frax. It's a stablecoin issuer.
That's not true.
And hi, I'm Kain Warwick. I run the Warwick crime syndicate family out of Australia. We own most of the coastal land, and we just jacked up all the rents.
Hi, my name is Serafin. I'm the founder of YieldXYZ. We are a yield aggregator.
All right, so yeah, we got some OGs up on the stage right now, and maybe that's where we'll begin. When I think DeFi, I think back to DeFi summer and kind of that feeling I had, and you know, thought they were going to change the world, change the financial system, you know, replace TradFi. Everything's 10x better. It's permissionless. You know, we sit here 4 years later, and I feel like a lot has changed. You know, we might even be working with TradFi now, which is interesting. And so my question to all of you guys is, what is the value proposition of DeFi now, right? Do we still have that magic? Are we still going to change the world? And maybe how has it changed or stayed the same, let's say, over the last 4 years and looking forward?
I'll take it. So Frax, how many of you guys have heard, used, or ever touched Frax tokens on chain? Oh, OK, pretty much awesome. Everyone, basically. So DeFi's changed a lot, especially with people's views of what ideal stablecoins are, lending primitives are. Everyone was experimenting with DeFi primitives in the original DeFi summer, right? Like summer 2021. The way that I like to say it for stablecoins even, right, is that there's basically two events that happened like before BC, before Christ and after Christ of stablecoins, which was the Terra implosion. And the way that I like to describe what happened with stablecoins is, for a long time, the holy grail design of stablecoins in DeFi was this, you know, immaculate, decentralized, you know, the best properties of Bitcoin, right? There's no blacklist, there's nothing, it's all non-custodial, but it's a stable USD unit, right? It's like the best of both worlds, which that was kind of the decentralized algorithmic design of stablecoins. After the Terra implosion, right? Like that's like the year one after. I think the collective consciousness of the industry really changed, right? The collective consciousness of the industry was that, okay, people don't actually want this as a USD unit. It's not safe. It actually doesn't work. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine of like perpetual motion, and it's not actually the way that we should be using dollars. And so the immaculate design of stablecoins and the collective consciousness of the industry really changed to safe, regulated, transparent, auditable stablecoins. And for example, Frax's new FRXUSD stablecoin is exactly in that direction. I think every single project has, in DeFi, kind of taken some of these lessons in the area that they build in, whether it's like lending, whether it's stablecoin issuance, whether it's you know, perps and all this stuff. And I'm sure that the new versions of products being built actually are improving on getting closer and closer to that final immaculate design of whatever it is they're building, AMMs and et cetera.
Maybe just jump in there. I don't disagree. What I do want to say, though, is that we need to consider the different demographics of users as well. So when this all started, and you know, Maker started DAI, and even before that, or if you look at something like LUSD nowadays, like those are still targeting that reg-free design. You know, it doesn't want to be frozen. It should be open to use. It should be free to use. And there is still the original DeFi crowd that wants that supports that, and that champions that. But at the same time, crypto isn't. I mean, conferences like this used to be 10 guys sitting on chairs, you know, with us kind of just talking over a beer. And like now, look at what it's become. That already shows you how much the scale has changed. And with that change in scale, you also change your users. So you have new users today that are in crypto not for those same reasons that the original crowd came in. And they need protections. Because the people I used to talk to on a daily basis back then were all technical people. They were all capable of doing their own, bespoke custom wallets on their own, like air-gapped PCs and stuff. Nowadays, people struggle figuring out how to open up a Coinbase account. So it's a very, very demographic, and each one of those has a very different requirement. But for the general masses in crypto, yes, I think it's walking that path towards what I tend to call more RegFi, which is sort of an intersection. It's not true DeFi, because true DeFi is decentralized. The second a third party has any kind of control, it's no longer DeFi. Then it becomes something else. And then it merges more into, RegFi, TradFi, any of those things. And then maybe just another comment on that, about where I think it's going is we didn't make a mistake. We built everything open. We built everything free, MIT, because we used to build off of each other. But at the same time, we've now built the infrastructure for traditional corporates to just come in, take our code, and run it themselves. So we've also built the tools of our own destruction when it comes to that big of a scale. But we'll always be there for the true, decentralized maxis.
Yeah, I think that when I look back now on how we built in DeFi and who we were building for, I think the audience is really important. The audience that we had back in 2018, 2019, 2020 through DeFi summer was an ideological and technical audience, right? They were there for like max decentralization. They were there for like the most convoluted scheme you could cook up was the one that they wanted. And that audience is a small audience, and we outgrew it, years ago. And so then the question is, what's the next audience that we're going to build for? We built all of those, very decentralized, pure primitives, and now we need to find some kind of hybrid approach. And I think that almost all of the OG DeFi founders, you've seen them go through this arc, and different people have taken different paths, but almost all of us have said, okay, cool, we tapped out the enthusiast crypto anarchist audience. What's next? Who am I building for? And I think the interesting thing is it's not one homogenous audience that you're building for after that. There's many different paths you can take, from regulated, more transparent, more custodial. There's a lot of different approaches that you can take where you're optimizing for different things for different audiences, because the audience for finance is very large. And it's very differentiated. It's not just an undifferentiated mass of people. And so I think that we will see different segments of things that are building on top of DeFi, extending DeFi. But I do agree with Andre that DeFi is DeFi. It has to be decentralized. Once you start adding counterparties and intermediaries to it, it becomes something else, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing. It's for a different audience.
Maybe one thing to add is what I find very encouraging to see is that a lot of the new companies that are coming up in this space adopt DeFi that was developed over the last couple of years, and it did not require DeFi to be reinvented from the ground up. So we did not have to go and kind of forego everything that had been done in the past to have permission DeFi or anything like that. It's very, very cool to see how a lot of these like neobanks that are arguably, of course, very TradFi in nature, are adopting DeFi in their own products. So, for example, we, just for background, at YieldXYZ, we essentially make it easy for anybody to add more than 1,000 yields into their products, be it wallets, dApps, or neobanks, even TradFi shops. And what's very cool is we just onboarded a neobank out of France. They're called D-Block. They're a fully regulated bank. They're not a proxy to some old school bank. They're a fully regulated entity themselves. And it's a current account, but they also have a self-custodial wallet that is embedded in the same app. And what's very cool to see is they actually launched Morpho Vaults, support for Morpho Vaults, directly in their self-custodial wallet. So you can on-ramp from euros to EURC in the neobank app, and then you can deposit that into Morpho Vaults on Base. And it's very cool to see because you effectively make adoption by the masses very easy, but you're still offering them DeFi without it necessarily being KYC gated or being an entirely different flavor that forcefully disrupts in a TradFi fashion what had been built in DeFi. And I think that's very cool to see.
No, these are really interesting and excellent points. And so it sounds like what I'm hearing is, all right, we have a new audience. We need to bring these people in. And I think the next, maybe the thing that's going to be the impetus for this is regulation here in the US. The Genius Act, potentially a market structure bill. Andre, you said something super interesting, which is, all this code, it's MIT, it's open source, it's forkable. Clearly, things are changing. Do you think that DeFi is going, like the biggest power user of DeFi, is it going to be these institutions, or are they going to, fork these and make their own products? Like what changes now once we get this regulation?
I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? Like, you'll have some that use some. Aave, I think, has shown and made great grounds in like having institutional adoption of stuff. Some companies that's going to be outside of their risk profile, so they're going to do it in-house, but they might still pay a license to the original creators, or at least their management team to sort of help, with parameterizing the stuff and those kind of things. And I think some are going to be ballsy and just fork it and do it themselves. But I also think those guys are going to be exploited into the wazoo. So that's a problem that'll fix itself eventually. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit of all of the above, right? But I mean, they'll never want the true DeFi stuff, like where they don't have the controls. They'll always need their backdoors. They'll always need their freezability, all of that stuff. I mean, as an example, right? Like I think we have, I'd say, 2 or 3 sort of anchor stablecoins in this ecosystem. And the last 30 days has felt like there's a new stablecoin launching every 24 hours by some companies that I've heard of or haven't heard of, So it's already clear that they see the market potential and they think they can capture it. And I think they'll have to go through the usual thing, try and do it, fail, try and buy someone out. If they're successful, that's them now. If they're not successful, eventually try and broker. And it'll go the same path with original internet companies. I mean, when the web just started, there were a million different companies starting every week, and most of it run out of guys' basements and stuff like that. And eventually the Google and the Microsoft and everything, and Apple came around and just ate up everything else and bought everything out and became the conglomerates they are today. So I guess it's up to us whether we give in to that or we accept it.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me, there was a lot of naive takes, including from myself, right, in the OG DeFi days. And I do think that there was a sense that we were going to replace all of TradFi with this pure play thing, right? And like a founder who's starting a thing, you kind of have to be irrational and believe that you're going to completely change everything, and then you hit.
I just want to add, we were 8 years younger, so we were dumber back then.
Yeah, a lot dumber. Exactly, a lot dumber. And so there was this belief that we could just kind of like raise all of TradFi to the ground and replace it with DeFi. And I think what we've got now is this hybridization, and we're seeing TradFi merging with DeFi. I think the important point, though, for me is that that's still better, right? If you look at the history of fintechs over the last 2 decades, it's kind of disastrous, right? Because they are dealing with like a ton of regulation. They're dealing with regulatory sandboxes. They're dealing with like legacy systems that aren't interoperable. And so this move towards hybrid CeFi DeFi at least means that the rails are interoperable, and it's an environment where a new entrant can come in. And the more CeFi uses DeFi, the more CeFi is using stablecoin rails, the easier it is for like some cracked 16-year-old dev to turn up and go, hey, I've got a good idea to do this thing, and they don't have to ask permission. And that's the big difference between DeFi and fintech. Is in fintech, if you want to do something, you've got to go to a bank, beg for access to an API or beg for access to their systems, probably don't get it. Whereas DeFi, anyone can turn up and they can use it. And so the more TradFi uses DeFi as their rails, the more accessible I think it is and the lower the barriers to entry are. And that, to me, is the win. Even if we didn't get pure DeFi replacing the world, I think we've still won.
I think that's exactly right. And going a bit further, we used to think we'd all replace the legacy financial system, but actually, I'll take the consolation prize, which is the legacy financial system comes to all the DeFi on-chain people and says, hey, we're looking to issue a stablecoin, we're looking to issue RWA tokens. How do we do it? Can we work with you guys? And that's actually one of the most frequent conversations that like Frax has. We issue our new Genius compliant FRX USD, and then when we go to talk to banks or institutions, there's usually two things. They say, oh, we're potentially thinking of issuing our own. How do we do that? And that's actually a really good positive sum step to collaborate. We don't even tell them, no, don't issue like Citi USD or JPM USD. We say, we'll help you actually do it. If you could integrate your stablecoin into your bank, just also integrate FRX USD. We'll do mint redeems, liquidity things, and actual on-chain integrations with your stablecoin, and more liquidity begets more liquidity. In fact, it's one of the interesting things is like it's the exact same DeFi strategy of positive sum. When everyone used to create curve pools together, Frax is known for being all over AMMs, on-chain lending, on-chain liquidity. We just do that now. We extend that hand to TradFi and do the same analog of helping build bridges, build liquidity to those institutions. And I think the most important part was that a lot of people thought that we would kind of grovel over to like banks, like you said, beg for access, beg for APIs and all this stuff. But it's actually been a equal hand extension to the on-chain DeFi world. And so that's actually, I think, the biggest victory that we've had is to have institutions come to us rather than us going over to them.
And I think that that's because you had a bunch of crazy people that were like, I'm going to build my own financial system over here, and it's going to be chaotic, but I kind of don't care, and it sort of worked.
Yeah, and in fact, you were saying before, like finance is a big market, and I think the real, accurate thing is finance is the biggest market. It is literally relevant to every single human being on Earth, and also now apparently AI agents in the billions, right? So it's like it's literally the most largest possible market. Obviously, there's small subsections of finance, borrowing, liquidity, and all these things. But the numbers are so large. Like when we at Frax talk to regulators or like the federal government for regulated stablecoin payments, like one of the things that I say it's just small numbers is, imagine if your tax payments from like the IRS could be done in payment stablecoins like USDC, like Frax USD, etc. Even 1% of the taxpayer base of 5.5 trillion is 55 billion, right? 55 billion is about USDC's entire market cap that we think is absolutely massive, right? And we're not talking about 20% of taxpayer base pays in payment stablecoins, 30%, 50%, just 1%, just one. And that literally is as big as USDC's entire market cap right now. And so these are such big numbers. Like truly, finance is the actual biggest market on Earth.
And actually, like on that, I think you mentioned the Genius Act, and I think it actually is regulation that has effectively prohibited stablecoin issuers from issuing native yield-bearing stablecoins. That is ultimately going to be such a tailwind to the industry because these stablecoin assets are going to be looking for yield. So I think it's going to essentially create a massive tailwind for the industry, and we're going to see a lot more stablecoin DeFi really kind of like lift all boats in DeFi and bring this back to like not just DeFi summer but DeFi submerged, because the assessments by the Treasury around the stablecoin market growing from like $250 billion to $2 trillion over the next 3 years or so. Again, if there's no yield generation on these stablecoins, users are going to look for yield for these stablecoin assets. So these banks or neobanks or whoever else is issuing these stablecoins, they're going to be forced to bring yield into their products, and I think that's going to be an amazing boost to this entire industry.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a massive market here. We're moving towards kind of like a global, unified, blockchain-based financial system. There's going to be hybrid solutions. It's going to be a spectrum of fully decentralized to fully centralized. But the benefit is that we are going to have a marketplace where there's room for competition of new entrants. And that's key, because competition is what's going to drive innovation, compress those margins, and ultimately, benefit end users. So my question for you guys, and obviously you're all working on something different, so now it could be a good opportunity to speak kind of more about what you might be building, but like, what is DeFi's edge from like a fundamental perspective, a mechanical perspective? How can you, outcompete the competition that might be in TradFi, or make something that they're going to want to use you for?
So I just want to slightly reframe the question in terms of competition and then expand on it. So one of the things that's really important about finance is that there's a lot of places that things are positive sum, meaning that everyone gets wealthier and everyone is better off. And it's not like the law of thermodynamics where energy can't be created or destroyed, just converted to different forms, right? And so the pie can get bigger for everyone, right? And so one of the things that I think people don't understand or think about enough is, for example, in the stablecoin space, everyone thinks, the competition is going to get so insane. There's going to be Walmart USD, Citi USD, JP Morgan USD, Frax USD, USDC, USDT, all these things. And that's true. However, there's a lot of ways in which you can actually work with these issuers so that everyone is better off. For example, when we actually work with like banks, institutions, money market fund issuers, all of these, we actually wire up how to actually mint and redeem Frax USD with everything else like USDC, USDT. And so it actually makes Frax USD the most liquid across all of these new RWAs, new regulated stablecoins that are about to be launched, which I'm not allowed to say yet, but all of these things. And
I think you said Walmart USD? Is that right?
I can't confirm or deny, but so the whole point about competition is, of course, there is competition at the end of the day, but there's actually more opportunities to be able to grow if you're creative, if you extend that hand of cooperation. And the real thing to do is figure out how to actually build those bridges and cooperate rather than go directly and try to take someone's piece of the pie, for example.
We're seeing a lot of new teams who are building companies, and I think they'll do fine. But I want to talk about the original edge of DeFi versus how that is the exact thing that prevents us from being able to compete. Because the original premise of DeFi and why I think it was originally so successful is that the ones that were building back then, we gave it all away. There were no middlemen. There were no brokers. If you deposited your stablecoin somewhere, you got 100% of the yield. There was nothing for a team because it was a dude and his few mates on Discord building over the weekends. It wasn't companies. So a big reason why DeFi, and I think blockchain as a whole, became as big as it is because it always removed the intermediary. That won't work. If you try and leverage that in today's demographic audience, they need the intermediary. They need someone to ask the question to. They need someone that can help them if they made a mistake or if it went to the wrong place or to freeze or to reverse. So all of a sudden, you're adding the brokers again. And now, the second you add the broker, you fall back into all the traditional finance space. It doesn't matter if you're doing DeFi. If you're an intermediary, you fall under traditional finance regulation. So I personally think the very thing that gave DeFi its edge is also the same reason it will lose against the TradFi alternatives over the long run.
I mean, yeah, talking about pure DeFi, like one of the naive takes that I had and many of us had is that, talk about DAOs, right? The autonomous part of that, this idea that you could just deploy code and the code would, be so beautiful that everyone would use it and it would not require any kind of infrastructure around it to make it work. And we have a few examples of that, but not many. the reality of the last 5-10 years of building in crypto is that things need support. There's like ancillary tasks that require human coordination that you can't just have a contract on chain doing, right? And I think that requires coordination, it requires funding, it requires, and we've not perfectly solved this, but like the existence of companies has kind of solved how we delegate risk and how we ensure that innovation happens, and there are ways that we can improve that for sure, and I think that those ways we will find hybrid solutions. But the last 5 years of DAO governance experiments are pretty dark. It's very inefficient, not great allocation of capital, not great allocation of resources, a lot of waste and inefficiency, and I think that part of that is because of the regulatory arbitrage. There's been the wrong incentives to do things in the wrong way, and so I do think that this new kind of rationalization of governance that we're seeing is going to be a very interesting change for the next few years, where you're seeing companies, instead of like a labs DAO model or a labs foundation model, but you're seeing companies come out and say, hey, we're going to build this software and deploy it, but we're also going to support it, and we're going to market it, we're going to ensure that it gets adoption, and I think that will be very, very interesting, and put some pressure on the OG builders to kind of up their game and become more efficient.
Yeah, I think the most important thing we've learned across the years is that different products and different primitives require different forms of decentralization or lack thereof. And so when everyone was ideological early, right, it was like maximum decentralization for the L1, the stablecoin, the AMM, the perp exchange, and all these things. And that's not necessarily true, right? Like for stablecoins, you're already pegging to a centralized unit, right? The USD. So it's like, regardless of whether you're the most decentralized stablecoin or you're like a blacklist regulated stablecoin like USDC or whatever, like you're already pegging to a centralized unit. And so some of these things have been misguided, right? Like it's like they're not actually, nor are they intended to be the most decentralized things. And I think the important thing is different product classes have now found their ideal amount of decentralization, right? So some of them are developed by labs entities, some of them are genuinely fully decentralized, autonomous, distributed, open source, upkept by developers like L1s, like certain L2s, and different things like perp exchanges, like Hyperliquid. They have this kind of middle ground where you benefit from self-custody, but it's obviously not a fully decentralized L1 in every aspect, and it's not supposed to be. It's this ideal optimization point for the actual product, and I think that's what is really valuable about how much the industry's matured from before.
To be honest, like I'm not super bearish on the middlemen kind of like entering the equation again, because again, it's a totally different demographic that is entering the market that might require that to get educated and have their first exposure to actual DeFi yields, even if they're somehow middleman. And to be frank, I think that it also ignores the fact that there's a lot of innovation happening in the actual fully self-custodial space, right? So I think, for instance, if a neobank offers a yield and offers it to their users, they get their first like USDC yield through Aave or Compound or Morpho, whatever, and they actually custodially manage these flows and charge insane fees. The users will start to look into that and understand that the actual fee, if they went directly to the protocol, is going to be much less, right? And I think that so there's enough motivation for them to go out there and actually try something else. So for them to take their stablecoin and for instance, move it into a platform such as Infinex, right? The complexity of actually utilizing these protocols is not that high anymore. There's been so much work. There's so much work that has been done on tooling. That I think the adoption for true self-custodial DeFi has come down so much that I think there's going to be a way easier convergence of this new entrant cohort that is then ultimately still going to go to DeFi, because if you want to get maximum yield, that's where you're going to have to go, right? So I'm very bullish on the competition that we're seeing from the self-custodial side. And I think that's going to force the hands of a lot of these neobanks and other players that might get first dibs at that new cohort.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think neobanks and fintechs adopting DeFi primitives is super bullish. It's like a Trojan horse for, more pure DeFi, right? Where, why would you use, Aave through, a Venmo or a Robinhood or something like that when you can just use Aave and go directly to it? And I think that people will figure that out and go, hang on a second, there's literally nothing stopping me from, going direct to the source and not getting, 50% of the fees going to some centralized entity.
That makes perfect sense, and I think as the consumer, like the prosumers might be figuring this out, as the average consumer figures it out, right? They're gonna move there. So do you guys think that is this like a technical problem? Like, is there some technical breakthrough from an infrastructure level that'll help us get the next billion users, or is it a distribution problem, right? Like, is it a UX problem? And maybe Kain, you can start, and each of you can kind of take a stab at one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very obviously a UX problem, and I alluded to this at the start where I said, we were building for purists, we were building for people that wanted complexity. If you tried to, I was on a bunch of podcasts, and I'm sure, some of the guys up here said similar things, where I was advocating for the complexity. I was like, it's good that MetaMask forces you to, read bytecode, because now you know how important it is that we're doing things on chain, right? And that is honestly nonsense. It was an insane level of cope to believe that. The reality is that the audience we were building for cared about that, but that was a very small niche audience, and in order for us to get to that next group of people, which isn't the unwashed masses, by the way, we're just talking about Binance and Coinbase users. There are hundreds of millions of people in crypto that do not do stuff on chain. They do it in Coinbase or Bybit or Upbit or Kraken or wherever. And if DeFi can't capture those people, then we have no hope of capturing the Robinhood people. So we need to be able to kind of bridge that UX gap. And I think that it took a little while. But my sense is that almost everyone who's building in the first gen of DeFi has come to this kind of conclusion and is trying different approaches to going to that wider audience. With Infinex, we've gone UX first and said, let's build from first principles and optimize for UX, not try to be purely censorship resistant. Other people are saying, let's go down a regulatory path. Different people are taking different tacks, but we've all realized that we're out of enthusiasts, and we thought we could make more enthusiasts by educating people, and that was retarded. That did not work. So we need to do something else.
Yeah, I think it's actually a multi-bottleneck problem. Like Kain is saying, there's a UX problem, but then let's say Infinex has solved the UX problem, then the next issue is there's a stablecoin problem, because banks can't use non-regulated, non-transparent stablecoins. So that's where the 20 trillion of bank deposits are. That's where M1 is, right? And so there's no good on-off ramps other than centralized exchanges. That's not how you convert even 5–10% of M1, the $20 trillion of M1 in circulation, through just Coinbase on-off ramping, right? The banks actually need to have payment stablecoins, conversions, et cetera. And then let's say that's about to be solved with the Genius bill and everything. Blockchain scalability isn't solved until things like Sonic, Solana, all of these high-performance chains can actually then bring the hundreds of billions of dollars of stablecoins, DeFi activity. So it's been a multi-pronged problem that is a coordination issue. But I think we're really at the actual influx of where the UX is about to be solved. The regulatory clarity for the most important primitive, the US dollar, is about to be solved. And then breakthroughs in performance and L1 design is about to actually allow those people to have cheap, fast transactions as well.
I think people always look for that sort of 0 to 1 moment, and the answer is just it's a slow, methodical trudge against time, because we're all far too stubborn to not keep doing it. I like always comparing to the early internet. Let's say you had fiber, like when the internet just launched. You had 2 guys on message boards sharing a half-a-kilobyte picture. There's nothing they would be able to do with that. So you always have to first build the demand, and that's normally a UX and a regulatory problem, and then you hit the wall again. And then you need to go from, dial-up to ISDN. So it's this continuous, repetitive cycle of increase capacity, max out demand, figure out the next thing. But I don't think it's a 0 to 1. I think we're just at a point where there's so many little different things that are going to keep happening simultaneously. And I mean, the space looks different every year that I look back at it. But while you're in that year, you don't even notice, because it's not 0 to 1. It's these very, very small incremental changes.
Yeah, to be frank, I think at this stage, at least from my perspective, it is a tooling question, because we validated that there is demand. There's immense amounts of demand that was driven, on the stablecoin side at least, by emerging markets where capital efficiency was just unbelievably low, where there was immense amounts of volatility in the local currencies. So that's solved for. I think adoption is starting to become solved for from a regulatory perspective as well. Whether it's all good or not remains to be seen, but I think it's in the US it's heading into the right direction. And so at this stage, it is a question of tooling, and it is a question of how easy do we make bringing DeFi yields into the products that users already use, right? And to be frank, that's what we're trying to solve. So I'm obviously talking my book here, but I think back in the day, being able to bring the latest yields into a product, you had to have a dedicated team of like 10, 15 engineers that worked on just that. It was complex, it was slow moving. If one of the engineers left that had built any of the code that was being utilized, and you couldn't really find somebody to replace him, it wasn't well documented, you were in deep shit. And so I think we provide literally any company 1,000 yields out of the box that they can deploy, that they can monetize if they want to, they don't have to. And I think that just levels the playing field and it drives a lot of competition. And I think competition is good for innovation, it's going to be good for adoption, and it's going to prevent the middlemen from extorting people that are starting to adopt these technologies. So yeah, I think it's a tooling question at this point, and it is being addressed. So I don't see there being a lot of hurdles for mass adoption, like eating up M1 and M2 with stablecoins.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. So we have a couple more minutes here, so a little time for some closing remarks. Maybe a question I would be interested in is, and you can each answer this. Like, what do you think what do you think DeFi looks like in 5 years from now, right? Whether it's killer use case, a killer app, kind of the architecture. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, what do you think the space is going to look like?
Well, since I'm the most into stablecoin part of DeFi, I think in 5 years...
We replace all the tokens with stablecoins. It's
that would
all
be great,
stable.
actually.
No more volatility, guys.
Stablecoin maximalism, yeah. That would be great. But I think in 5 years, there will be over 1.5 trillion stablecoin market cap. Not saying which stablecoins, what ranking, what order, but that is like...
No preference, right?
No preference, yeah. But I think that when people realize that Tether's size is only 1% of the M1 money that's currently in the banking system, they realize how early, I know everyone keeps saying we're early, blah, 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 but this is actually, you can just have a financial number, right? As banks convert their deposits to stablecoins, other stablecoins actually create their ecosystems and things like that. I'd say 1.5 trillion.
I think the U.S. Treasury came out and said they think it's like 2.5 trillion by 20. You might need to pump those numbers up. Yeah.
Did they say 2.5?
You need to pump those numbers up. That's a little bearish.
He's talking about fracks, though. That's the thing, right? He's saying 1.5 trillion fracks. That's the understated part of that.
Andre?
I've been trying to think this whole time, like DeFi, and again, I'm talking about DeFi in a very purist sense. I think DeFi has pretty much peaked in terms of where it can, in both tech, usage, UX, any of those things. When you start talking about that sort of mix between TradFi and DeFi, RegFi, whatever you want to call it, where there's a broker, an intermediary, something like that, I really like what he was saying earlier about that sort of intersection between, you know, you're in your Chase Bank app or whatever, and you know, you can just have your Frax in there, or you can, you know, go deposit it directly yourself into your Infinix wallet. And the trade-off there is like, it'll be nice if it can even show you, you know, like, okay, look, you leave it with us, it's safe, it's insured, yada, 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 but you're earning 3%. You put it here, you take those risks, you take the custody, but you're looking at 6-7%, you know, and then people willing to do that learning curve. So I think that'll be cool, at least. But I think DeFi, in a pure sense, is systematically dying out over the next few years, other than the purists and the criminals.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is you have this, or we've had a spectrum, right, from pure DeFi to centralized exchanges for the last, 10 years or so, right? And now this new entrant's come in that's like way over here called TradFi that's actually starting to get involved. And what's happened is the centralized exchanges have realized that they can't compete against TradFi. Right? They're using the same tech as TradFi, but like they're banging rocks together compared to what a lot of the TradFi companies have in terms of resources, distribution, all of those things. And so they have seen this wave, and they're starting to kind of try to figure out how they approach this from like a hybrid perspective, right? They're hybridizing, they're launching chains, they're launching dexes, they're trying to move towards the DeFi space. And so I think Andre is right in the sense that somewhere in between pure DeFi and CeFi today, as we know it, is where the majority of activity will go. And then I think you'll have TradFi over there that's starting to kind of come in and use these rails. And so I think it's going to look much more complex than it does today. I think it's going to be a much more complex ecosystem with a lot of different options, with a lot of different trade-offs, unregulated to regulated, pure DeFi to CeFi. And I think it's going to be 10 times bigger than it is today.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree that it's going to be more complex and you have more entrants that are competing, but I think the UIs and the UX is going to be radically simplified. You're going to have access to it everywhere. And you can choose yourself what type of journey you want to embark on. So yeah, I do expect it to be ubiquitous, and I think the complexity just gives users more choice.
All right, and that's all the time we have, so thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.